Well, thank you so much, Dr. Thompson, for your words, and thank you to the Women's Studies program, all of you, for cultivating this award. Over my 12 falls at ETSU, this is my 13th, I have watched it grow more and more prestigious, at least in my view, because of so many of my admired colleagues who have won it. This award reminds me of my old friend, the late Dr. Karen Chaka, who directed the Women's Studies program years ago. She was certainly a notable woman. It is great to be recognized here, of course, but the real value in this award and its distinct privilege is getting to give this talk. It's been a real gift to me to reflect on my career and life in the rigorous way that you have to do when you're going to talk it out loud. And I thank you all for being here to listen to it. And I want to also mention Dr. Martha Kopp, who listened to me talk about things for hours. Some of it ended up in this presentation. I'll tell you the truest version of myself tonight. Around 1910, my great-grandparents left Hungary, Czechoslovakia, and Yugoslavia for America. They landed in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, a booming steel town full of many other immigrant families seeking a better life. I grew up hearing my great-grandparents' stories of survival, living 10 to an apartment, taking in boarders to rent beds in their homes, and just eking out a living. My family always lived near Bethlehem. I grew up in that town to some extent, and I was close to my grandparents. These were the first generation Americans in my family, the first to speak good English, and they loved and spoiled me, each in his or her own way. My Jodi Polaha bought me one of these pearls when I was born and added them until every birthday and special occasion until I had a full necklace. Even though it was their parents who immigrated, my grandparents still lived stories of escape and survival. They quit school early and worked hard with their hands and their backs. They were tough people who smoked, all four of them, swore, had loud arguments, prayed fervently, and doled out severe warnings on a regular basis. I'm glad that Commissioner Williams is here because she doesn't know this story, but my Grammy Gumbos always called me Susie when she was warning me, like as in, Susie, if you think such and such, you've got another thing coming. She called all the women in our family Susie when she said these things. I don't know why, but we have that in common. Ultimately, my grandparents survived well enough to send my parents to college, and my parents then provided us a mostly middle-class upbringing. And I say mostly because our proximity to the hard-hitting years of recent generations lent the feeling that the floor could drop out at any moment, and a few times it did. But while my parents grew up in families where the story was about escape and survival, in raising us, they had strong enough social and financial footing to shift the narrative to one that was about striving and exploring. Nike started its Just Do It campaign in 1998. I Googled this. But at least a decade before that, my dad told us kids his motto was do it. And we heard dozens of motivational speeches in which we were told to do it, and there was never any limitation for my being a girl. In a similar way, my mother encouraged me in wide-ranging creative pursuits, and there are some really crazy examples, but I'll just give you one. For a time, I visited nursing homes with a troupe of Catholic nuns, all of us dressed as clowns. Above all, my parents communicated to us that they hoped we'd take chances. They stood by the idea, whatever chances we took, and we tried some interesting things, and they loved us unconditionally. We remain a close family to this day. I stand here tonight on the shoulders of 3 generations who sought a better life. My proximity to the dramatic shifts from one generation to another have marked me deeply and inspired the life that I've lived. I had a rough transition through middle school And so it was when I entered my freshman year in Holy Name High School in 1984, I was placed with low-achieving students and finished the year ranked 75th out of 125 students. However, before the year was out, in the early spring, my science teacher, Mr. Shalter, announced that while other classes were required to complete science projects, for our group it was optional. I hated doing science projects, yet in that moment, I felt I needed to stand out. I realized I could do better, and I wanted to prove it. This was a singular moment in my life. I have tried to walk back through this moment 100 times and get inside my 14-year-old head and figure out why I stepped up. And I don't know, really. But I do wonder if, without realizing it, I had internalized my family narratives, a bit from my great-grandparents about an opportunity, a bit from my grandparents about hard work, and a bit from my parents about striving. So I approached Mr. Shalter after class, and I said I'd like to do a science project, but not in physics or chemistry or biology or astronomy, literally. And he said, "How many S's are there in the word Mississippi?" And when I thought about the answer, my eyes moved up and to the left, and he pointed this out, and he said that meant that I was using my right hemisphere. Isn't that interesting? It was. Thus began a 4-year high school study of hemisphere dominance, a theory which never panned out in the actual scientific literature, but which ignited my career in psychology, a career that has been a true love for over 2 decades. By my sophomore year, I had quit the cheerleading squad because it interfered with the state science fair competition, and in 1987, I graduated 20th in my class, receiving an award for the most improved student. I went to the University of Pittsburgh, where I had the opportunity to experience urban life, a liberal arts education, and being completely broke. And these 3 things contributed to this dramatic personal renaissance for me. It was very tumultuous. I sought adventure and disruption and nonconformity. I wore my hair, there are no pictures of this, I promise. I wore my hair in beaded cornrows. I quit shaving. I threw out all of my furniture, including my bed. And to my parents' chagrin, I found many opportunities to get from Pittsburgh to New York City, to live there, to visit there. And it was, in the 80s, a very dirty and mean and intimidating place, and I thought that was awesome, and I loved it. But somehow, as I was seeking the edges of order and meaning, I was successful academically and figured out that I was capable of directing my own life, being independent, and making a contribution. More importantly, I took the narrative my parents had given me about striving and exploring, and I made it my own. And that theme has persisted for me continuously since. It was also in these years that I found that I had an incredible well of energy inside of me, and that energy has never left me. They say that it's not what you know, but who you know, and for me that panned out in the mentorship that I had in Dr. William Pelham, an internationally recognized expert in the area of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. He had developed a summer camp-like kind of treatment program for these kids at Pitt, and I worked very hard in his program, 12 to 14-hour days in the summer and part-time during the school years. Pelham introduced me to clinical psychology, a specific brand of psychology that's based on the scientist-practitioner model. And the idea is that if you're a really good clinician and you're spending time with patients, you'll ask better research questions. And if you're a researcher who's thinking about what the evidence base looks like and you know this stuff, you'll bring that to your clinical practice. Pelham's program was a living example of that model. He was a prolific writer, he ever empirically minded and quite intimidating. So of course I thought he was great. His letter of recommendation opened many doors for me in my early career. I went from there to Auburn University, a major change of culture, to get my PhD in clinical psychology in 1998. 20 years later, I remain a scientist practitioner. On the one hand, I feel very actualized when I'm with patients, and I feel truly privileged to join with them in their places of hurt and fear. But on the other hand, I'm very energized in conversations with colleagues and working at the desk where I can write and develop and think. Auburn University gave me two big changes. One, of course, was this huge shift from being a city slicker to developing a deep love for living and working in rural areas that I've really maintained to this day. I feel especially appreciated in these kinds of places, and I love being surrounded by natural spaces. The other thing that happened at Auburn, I do have a picture of this one, so I discovered I could do things athletic. I was not athletic growing up. I did not take well to the sports my parents encouraged me to try, but in my early 20s, through a strange twist of circumstances and changes in the plot, I tried a bunch of triathlons, and I discovered that my story, my narrative about striving and exploration could be applied to wide-ranging physical pursuits, and that somewhere in that challenge, there was a feeling of flow and true happiness. I also found that intentionally stressing myself through physical challenges works a bit like an inoculation for unanticipated real-world stressors. It made me stronger. And finally, I discovered that well of energy that I have is easier to direct when I tame it a bit with routine exercise. It's been about 30 years since I learned I could do this, and I really do try to find a way to get out and do something just about every day and challenge myself to do something kind of not that smart sometimes, just so that I have the extra challenge. I went from Auburn to rural Nebraska. I had a position at the University of Nebraska Medical Center. I was interested in continuing to do rural work. And it was there that really I had the biggest aha of my career. In 1998, made a rather unusual arrangement with a pediatric practice in Hastings, Nebraska. And the deal was that I would drive the 2.5 hours out there, which sometimes looked like that, this is Nebraska, to their clinic, their primary care pediatric clinic. I would see patients all day, spend the night, see patients the whole next day, and then drive back. I have some really good tornado stories I can also tell. This is me at that time. At the time, the idea in my mind was that I was going to get this mental health service out to this woefully underserved area. But what I hadn't realized was by positioning myself in primary care, there were all kinds of advantages to the service. Patients had better show rates when their pediatrician recommended that they come back and see me. They were less concerned about stigma. They had more confidence they had a lot of confidence in their referring doctor, and sometimes that transferred to me. I could coordinate their care easier. If something wasn't going right, I could step out in the hall and talk to their doctor. A whole lot of other things I would mention just really made this work incredibly gratifying, and I kind of realized that this was the direction that I wanted to go. This model of building mental health services into primary care is called integrated care. And in 1998, I was one of the first people pioneering this work. And it's really defined my career, my research, teaching, clinic work, all the development work I've done. This kind of work is not for the faint of heart. Historically, mental health services or psychotherapy have a reputation for being kind of long and involved and mystical and stigmatizing. And our field, I think, has not done itself a lot of favors by using language full of weird jargon and not collaborating well with other health providers, developing interventions that take 30 one-hour sessions over 30 weeks. We know that primary care providers don't really understand what we do very well, and that patients don't always like it. Their show rates are not very good. Does anybody know what the modal number of visits to a psychologist is? It's 1. That's how many times people come. That's not a very big number. So figuring out how to make that type of service with all of those issues fit into a fast-paced population health model like primary care is very challenging. It's challenging to do it. It's challenging to make a business case for it. It's challenging to do research in those environments. The whole deal is tough, and it's not an efficient type of work that moves one along the promotion and tenure timeline in a quick fashion. Working in integrated care has always been an entrepreneurial endeavor for me, full of risk and exposure. And as I've done more of that work, I've taken on more work full of risk and exposure. I often recall the words of a colleague who said, "If you want to be on the cutting edge, sometimes you're going to have to bleed." About the time I realized the kind of guts and grit this work would require, I hung this picture next to my desk. This is Missy Giove, the famous women's downhill mountain biker. Giove said she built her skills in the sport by just riding down the hill and hoping that she made it a little bit further the next time before she crashed. And when I heard this, I had this great shift in perspective, sort of noticing that my failures in innovation, every grant proposal or project idea that I pitched, if it crashed, well, it could be kind of a cool thing, right? Like I could say I got a little further and I could get up and sort of be this person like Giove and sort of brag on this whole thing, make it part of the game, basically. I guess I like the whole persona, I like the idea of being able to say something like, I guess I just have bigger ovaries. 1998 was a big year for me in terms of finding my life's passion. Not only did I discover work in integrated care, but I also met my husband, Steve Jones, on a mountain biking trail in Iowa. That is not where we are in that picture. This year we are celebrating 20 years of cycling together, and we've been on dozens of incredible adventures riding all over the country. If I have a secret sauce for success, Steve is the main ingredient. He's been the best possible match to me and my style, and I love him beyond measure. So we came to Johnson City in 2006 for this perfect fit job at ETSU, where they asked me to do teaching and research and clinical work and integrated care. It's perfect. Steve had just retired from 20 years in the Air Force, and we had newfound freedom in choosing where to go. We had a 1-year-old son, and would soon have another on the way. And we wanted an outdoor life in a small town near the mountains. And of course, once we got to Johnson City, started looking around, I was determined to live in the tree streets. I love the old homes, the diverse community, the possibility of walking and biking more. What I discovered pretty quickly was that if I wanted this type of community, I had to be part of creating it. My first lesson was when I became concerned about the burned out shell of a historic home around the corner from me. The boys and I walked by it on our way to their preschool every day and watched raccoons coming and going through its broken windows. When a contractor began restoring it, I found he was building it into a 3-bedroom apartment, or 3-unit apartment building, which is actually against our current zoning code. Working with neighbors, the developers in the city, we had the plans retooled so that the house was built for single family within code. I actually have quite different feelings 10 years, 12 years later about affordable housing in my community, but the point is that I was empowered by this first kind of investment, this small investment in sort of looking around and seeing what I could do in my community. And since then, my investments have grown exponentially, as well as how I define my community, which have really expanded to include our whole county and actually our whole region. We have this website that we post our hikes on, and we describe how to get to them, and there are hikes all over the region on that website. It's something I care about. At about 50 years old, almost, I still very much live the intertwined narratives of my ancestors and family about self-improvement, hard work, striving, and exploration. The path I have walked has developed me in all of the ways that I've just described, and I still have a deep well of energy inside of me. I wake up in the morning excited to get going just about every day. I'm proud of all this, but I know that it's been by luck and privilege that I'm here. Certainly the privilege of my race, class, and country made many of these developments possible. And also, every day I look around and think, what luck to land in a university and town and county and region on the cusp of so much possibility, where my skills that I've developed to this point are a great match to what needs to be done. And what incredible fortune, even more, to find so many willing and talented collaborators. And so many of you are here tonight, and I'm just looking around and feeling so appreciative. It's wonderful to come to work or be in my community, working on various projects, or see you wherever I see you, and know that we're all doing things to make this place better. I want to especially thank those of you who wrote letters of nomination for me tonight. Some of those folks are decade-long partners of mine in the work I do in my neighborhood and at my day job. Appreciate that very much. I also count myself incredibly privileged to have good health for myself and my family, financial resources. My parents, husband, and children are incredibly supportive of my work, and I certainly could not do all of this without them. I'm often overwhelmed. I'm overwhelmed by an extraordinary sense of harmony in my life around what I have been given, but also how the universe sort of matched and empowered me to do something with those things. In these moments, I feel like I've arrived at a table where I've been served a bigger slice of the pie, and my gratitude expands. My diploma from Auburn University is framed in one of those $10 borderless glass clip frames that you buy at like Walmart. And if you look closely, you'll see that it's still creased in a few places from where I had crushed it in my suitcase on the way home from commencement. Somehow, as proud as I was of finishing a doctoral degree, the act of carelessly throwing my diploma into my suitcase signified that the degree was not the point. One of my favorite quotes of all time, the goal creates the process by which the process becomes the goal. I work hard from getting stuck on a specific outcome. Instead, I work hard on living the process with my compass in hand, keeping an eye on the values that for me are a clear North Star. Also, every day I drink water from a beautiful handmade mug that was gifted to me a long time ago by a colleague and friend who later, after a twist of circumstances, treated me quite poorly. I felt, and I still feel, quite low about the loss of that friendship. And yet I know I did the best I could in it. I was my best self. I even found a way to move on with dignity in spite of how hurt I was. I keep that mug around to remind myself that I can tolerate the pain of mistreatment or of failure in general. The words of Rilke ring in my ears. Let everything happen to you, beauty and terror. Just keep going. No feeling is final. Not long before he passed away, Johnson City Commissioner Van Brocklin reminded me that if you want something done, ask a busy person. And it struck me so funny, I laughed so hard when he said that. But Socrates says to be is to do. I'd like my life to be a testimony that being busy can be done with intention, if intention is cultivated. For me, living a life consistent with my values while also being present in each moment are the keys to a balanced and fulfilling life, if not a happy one. I do hope I get to do that for a long time. One of my personal heroes is Diana Nyad, who at the age of 60 decided to become the first person to swim without a shark cage from Cuba to Florida, a distance of 110 miles. She made several attempts, in each case physically pushing herself beyond imaginable limits. And in 2013, at the age of 64, and on her 5th attempt, she completed the swim in 53 hours. Later, she said that at age 64, she did something that at age 64, no one at any age or of any gender had ever done. And there is no doubt in my mind that I am at the prime of my life today. So I'd like to think I'm just getting started. Thank you all for this award and for hearing me tonight.
Dr. Polaha, thank you for inspiring us to strive and to explore in academics, in integrative care, or even on 2 knobby wheels or tires. So, I'd like to invite, I would like to invite all of us for questions and answers. I think Dr. Atkins and Dr. Polaha might come up to the front, and if you have questions, then we can entertain them for a few minutes now and then return to more refreshments and mingling. So.
I just want to say that we always shop on Black Friday, and I want to take a person with a PhD in shopping. I was like, ooh,
I would tell you don't
I want
go.
her on my team. Yeah.
Don't go on Black Friday.
You said you went, though.
I took it because it was their experience.
My dad has a question.
Yes, Dr. Polaha, what exactly is that picture of? I hope there aren't any sharks.
That's me swimming in Watauga Lake. There are no sharks in Watauga Lake. My dad has kayaked beside me. Pretty much everyone in my family has kayaked beside me at some point in time.
Okay.
Yeah. Dr. Click.
How far have you swam in Montana?
She's tag teaming with my dad. So I got this idea that I should swim the entire length of the lake. Don't ask me how that came about. It truly took me years to get to the point where I could truly even train to do it. And then I did. So it's a 12.5-mile distance, and it took me 8.5 hours. And I followed the rules of not touching a boat or taking a break. Like, I swam the whole time. So
I don't even think I could walk for that amount of time.
I actually think shopping on Black Friday is more physically challenging. But
I'm interested from both of you. What in your life has surprised you the most?
if you have that one go.
I think something surprising for me has just been how kind people really are when you get to know people that might seem like they're untouchable, or you don't have any hope of knowing them, or that they're out there somewhere. When you talk to people, they put their pants on the same way we do, and they go grocery shopping, and they shop on Black Friday. And usually, like, people are willing to take the time to talk to you and listen. And I often tell my interns, you could send an email to a CEO and see if he'll respond. And I've had students that have, had an opportunity to have coffee with somebody for 15 minutes. So really, people are kind. People are usually generous. That's surprising to me, maybe.
Well, I mentioned a couple of times in my talk that I try to live in a way that's consistent with values, and it still surprises me how often I get motivated by something that culture or the context that I'm in, maybe it's something in academia or something in the community that seems esteemed, and I should want it because it's an esteemed thing. And it always surprises me when I have a minute to reflect and realize, oh, but that isn't really what I'm about. I'm going for it because it's this thing that I'm supposed to want, or that everyone wants, or that I've been trained to want. And I sort of know that those tricks are out there, but it surprises me how frequently you can get tricked by those things.
This is not for you, Dr. Polaha. You said you commuted to Knoxville for your PhD. Did you have classes every day? How in the world did you do that?
Well, probably the first key is that I had a very generous husband. I didn't mention that I retired from retail and I went to school full time. I usually had classes a couple of days a week, and then I taught, or I actually took a class. So I was usually down in Knoxville 3 days a week. I tried to do a turnaround, and I bummed on people's couches oftentimes. So I found I actually invited myself into several people's homes and said, "Can I please sleep on your couch?" I still have a long-standing 13-year friendship with someone who I literally said, "I really need to sleep in your living room floor. Please let me." Anyway, so I had usually one turnaround, and I usually only made about 3 trips a week, and it's doable. It's good thinking time. I put a lot of miles on my Honda Civic those years, but really it was good thinking time, and it just kind of becomes your driveway. Like it was just what I had to do. So it was doable. I wouldn't discourage anyone from doing it, although I had to have a lot of support at home to be able to not clean the house and not cook dinner or whatever that I was failing to do at the time. Yes?
Yes, son.
What was it like for a woman, I suppose, whenever you were like going to college, before you went to college, and you didn't have, when you had a hard time before middle school,
Mm-hmm.
and then you went into high school, and after that time, it was a rough period. What were you like, thinking and doing?
Yeah,
Right then that you realized you needed this.
Yeah, it was like I suddenly realized I needed to do something. That's the most interesting thing about that story. And I don't remember why I was struggling, buddy. I really don't. I just know that I wasn't trying very hard. And then suddenly it clicked. I was like, oh, I got to get with the program. I don't want to be in a class where science projects are optional somehow. So it just turned on, yeah? You got to look for those opportunities, though, for sure. Thank you.
Thank you all for being here this evening. We thank our special guests. We thank our families for joining us. And most of all, we thank the two of you for your leadership and service on this campus and in the community. So a warm round of applause.